Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today's lecture is on the methodology of economics. Once again, I'm your presenter, Shabani Angovishi. There are basically two methods of approaching economics. We have what is called the deductive method, and then we have the inductive method. So these are the two major approaches to the study of economics in as far as methodology is concerned. Under deductive method, as a researcher, you start from few general principles, and these principles are normally believed to be axiomatic, that is, they do not require proof. So you're beginning from a general premise and moving on to the specific premise. So you're going to derive or come up with other principles by logical interpretation. You're beginning with a general principle, with a general theory, and then through deduction you're going to come up with other principles. And there's also the inductive method. This involves using a large number of facts or data collected by statisticians from particular instances to work out a general law. So here you study several specific instances, and then you look at the underlying pattern and you come up with a conclusion, or you come up with a general theory that explains the relations in different individual circumstances. And this is deemed to apply under all circumstances, okay, as you do your studies or your research under inductive method. Now, sometimes the examples that are given under inductive and deductive methods. So for instance, if you're beginning from a general premise, you'd say all people are equal. Jane and Mary are people, therefore Jane and Mary are equal. So you begin from a general premise, that is, you begin from all people are equal. If it's the other way around, then you begin with Jane and Mary are people, and then you go on to talk about the term or the phrase all people are equal. Okay, so you're beginning from what is specific, you're moving on to something that is general. So that is the major difference that is there. And we can also give examples, like for instance, issues that involve the generation of formulas or the derivation of formulas in mathematics can be regarded as inductive, whereas those that involve the application of those formulas, like if you're working out a certain problem, that essentially is deductive, because you begin from a general principle, that is the formula, and then you work out the solution to a specific problem. I hope we understand. We know the difference now between deductive and inductive methodology. Now, economics heavily relies on the formulation of models or models. And you need to understand that essentially a model is just a theory. That is, you're going to have some assumptions, you're going to have predictions or hypotheses, which you're going to use to predict something about certain economic phenomena. So essentially that is what a model is. Excuse me. And what you need to note concerning models is that there is, because the real world is so complex, and that masses of detail are often obscured under other underlying patterns that you more often than not tend to rely on models to predict certain relationships among economic variables. Because if you're to look at the entire world as it is, the real world, it becomes very difficult for you to understand the underlying patterns. So you need to simplify reality, and then you come up with a model or a theory that will explain the pattern of relationships among the various variables that you are trying to study as an economist. The one thing we need to note as well is the fact that a model needs to be constructed in such a way that it puts aside irrelevant and unimportant considerations and variables and only looks at the major factors. So those are the ones that will be incorporated even as you're trying to come up with a model. Then you also need to know that the assumption of a model do not need to be exact replicas of reality. So it can just be something that is sort of a proxy assumption that will help you to explain what is actually going on in the real world, and you don't need to go for an exact replica. An example I would give is when we talk about demand. You'll find that there are so many factors that affect demand. Like we may talk about, say for instance, the prices of other goods. We may talk about the preferences, the tastes, the weather. All those are factors that affect demand. But when you come to the point where you want to develop a model of demand, or should we say when we talk about the theory of demand or the law of demand, you'll find that it only considers one factor, which is the price, okay, as a factor that affects demand. And you have to know that there are all these other factors. So those other factors are regarded as unimportant and are left out. I hope you understand what it means when it comes to coming up with a model, and what are some of the things that you need to include or you need to watch out for even as you are developing one. What is the purpose of a model? Of course, it would be pointless for us just to talk about models when they are not even that important. We need to understand why models are needed in economics. So the purpose of a model is to make predictions about the real world. And in many respects, the most important test of a model is how well it predicts. Many are the times when economists are called upon to explain what is going on in the economy. And you find that if you are to explain what is going on, you need to follow back on what has been identified, like in terms of the variables and how they relate to each other. So what you're trying to do is predict the prevailing situation basing on the model. So a model will help you in deriving conclusions or coming up with conclusions. Then we need to know that if it is to be useful, a model must simplify the real situation. The depiction of models. Many times in economics, you will come across graphs, tables, and equations. And those essentially are models, okay? So they're trying to help you understand something about the relationship between variables. So models are often depicted in such a way. Okay, I hope we understand that. So we use graphs, we may use tables, we may even use equations, or even just mere statements to depict or to explain or show the relationship between one model, or between one variable rather, and other variables. That is, you're going to have the independent variables and you're going to have the dependent variables to help you explain how things are playing out in the economy, or how variables are playing out in the economy. So in a nutshell, we have looked at methodology, we've talked about deductive method, we went on to look at inductive method, then definition of a model, and the points that we need to note concerning models, like how do you go about formulating a model, what are some of the important things that you need to include and what you need to leave out. Then we've also talked about the purpose of a model. Why do we need models? And how models are actually depicted. Okay? So essentially that is what we've talked about today. I hope this lecture has helped answer some of your concerns. And I hope you find time to go through so that you make yourself well versed with these concepts, because they're going to help you understand the subject matter of economics. So I hope to meet you next time, and good morning.